Welcome to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. It is Friday, March 21st, and tonight I am joined by Carl Cannon, our Washington Bureau chief and executive editor, who's a regular host of this program, and by Heather Wilhelm, who is a columnist for National Review and a former columnist for Real Clear Politics. She joins us tonight. Heather, good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
And I should say the author of an upcoming novel, of which is unnamed, or it has a name apparently, but you're not telling anyone because it's top secret.
Top secret name. It's going to be amazing. So, yeah.
And when is that? When is the novel due? Do we know?
That's the question everyone keeps asking. I tell myself, didn't J.K. Rowling take like 15 years to write Harry Potter? So I figure I have about that long, you know?
At least that long. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about DOGE. Because we have this, one of the things that we do, for those who are not aware of Real Clear Politics, and we link to mostly op-eds, but we'll often come across, these days we're linking to everything from Substack to X posts to video clips. And last night, Laura Ingraham did an interview with a guy from the DOGE team who is working now in the IRS. And he was there with Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary. She basically asked him to sort of describe what he does. And what he said was he's there to sort of upgrade the tech platform of the IRS. This is something that's been ongoing now for the past, I think he said it was 35 years late and about $15 billion over budget. It was a fascinating interview. And this guy is from the private sector, runs his own company. He's a software developer. And he said he just heard from a bunch of folks that, how important this was, and he decided to take time off to come into the government to do it. Carl, I'll start with you. Were you as fascinated by this interview as I was?
Yeah, I was, Tom. And the numbers, the numbers of people. What did he say? He has a mid-sized bank has, and a mid-sized bank, I mean, several billions and billions in assets, but a mid-sized bank has a couple of hundred IT people. And what did he say? The IRS has several, just
8,000.
8,000.
He said the IRS processes about the same number of transactions as a mid-sized bank. And, where they have 200 people on the IT staff, they have 8,000 at the IRS, which is
right. And 8,000 sounds like more than 200. And if it was, a war games and you were talking about one infantry against another, you'd think 8,000 is better, but you start to see the problem. If the government has 8,000 people, how do you even coordinate a team that large? And you start to think that, I guess from California, I'm remembering Jerry Brown, his first time, less is more sometimes. And I saw this and it opened my eyes. Tom, Heather, you haven't been on the show, but I've been kind of critical of DOGE and the helter-skelter, chaotic, inhumane way that they've gone about reducing the federal workforce. But you listen to this interview and you thought, okay, this thing is out of control and really does need to be streamlined. That's what I got out of it, Tom.
Heather, part of the reason that Laura Ingraham, she said she was doing this is because there have been just story after story after story about DOGE. They're like they're this invading force and they're taking over and they're just, tearing stuff to the ground and they're, digging through people's private information and all these sort of nightmarish, the way that it's been framed. This guy seemed like a pretty normal dude who was just, sort of a computer geek guy who was just there to try and help, sort of clean up the mess.
Yeah. And I think what's really sort of astonishing here is the wide contrast of messaging between the Democrats and the Republicans, right? I mean, here we have two highly competent, impressive guys from the private sector just going in and saying, we want to save the Americans, the American taxpayer. We want to make sure their money is being decently allocated. We want to make sure things are accountable and fair. And then you have, a few days back, I don't know if y'all saw this, Chuck Schumer goes on The View, and he's literally making fun of Americans who want to hang on to the money that they earned as greedy. I mean, I know what message goes further with the American people. And I think most people know, at least one or two people who have had a run-in with the IRS. It's a huge Borg. It's unaccountable. You can't get somebody on the phone. So I think the more that the Trump administration can get these guys out there, and like you said, these are normal, competent guys who are just trying to improve the efficiency of government.
Carl, the other thing that really struck me about this interview was that he said, when he talked to people, he said, the good news is we actually have really good people in government. And I know this speaks to some of the stuff that you've been talking about, that there are good government employees and we don't want to just toss the baby out with the bathwater. But he said, we got some pretty good talent. We got some pretty good coders. And when I ask him how to solve the problems, he's like, they get it. They have the right answers. The problem is that they can't get it done. They haven't been empowered to make these kinds of decisions. I guess that speaks to the just sort of incredible layers of bureaucracy that have built up over time to the point where, as Heather said, it's now like a Borg. Like you can't even fight it.
Well, I don't demonize the IRS. I had a run-in with them myself. They sent me this bill. You owe $300,000 in taxes. And I owed. They were off, by decimal point. I owed 300, and did
you have a heart attack when you got that letter?
No, it was so far off. I knew that my income tax wasn't going to be 10 times my income. But I got somebody on the phone. The IRS had. This is about 5 or 6 years ago. They had these people, volunteers really, who answer your calls. I got some woman, and she said, "Oh, I'm gonna have to call you back." I thought, "Well, that's great," because I've been on the phone for half an hour. She called me back. I had a very pleasant experience, and they fixed their mistake. I don't think it's bad people work for the IRS. I think the bureaucracy has over time. It's like it protects itself. It creates layers. And I don't think because it doesn't like Americans. I think it's trying to avoid mistakes and not get in trouble and kind of protect itself. And what's needed is someone to come in and make it better and more efficient. That would probably cost jobs. But these wouldn't be necessarily the accountants. These they might be some of the 8,000 IT people. But this idea that you're going to, if you get rid of, the IRS, you hear conservatives talking away. Somebody my age would never imagine a conservative would ever talk, because if you get rid of the IRS, half the people won't pay their taxes and the deficit will be even worse. But it seems to me that all these agencies could be made more efficient. And instead of fighting Elon Musk, I'd like to see the Democrats kind of say, our relative leaders say, hey, we'll work with you. Because there are some agencies, the National Park Service probably needs more people, not fewer people. And some other agencies, Department of Education, I don't know, USAID, some of these people maybe can, use a haircut. But just demonizing Elon Musk, what I think of that, Tom. I just think that's partisanship, and it's not helping the American people. It's hyper partisanship.
Yeah, but Carl, let's not be. It's nice to believe that these government bureaucracies are all, they're not political or they haven't been politicized. And I have two words for you: Lois Lerner.
Oh, I knew you were going to bring that up.
Of course, I'm going to bring that up. Why wouldn't I? This
Heather,
is an example.
Help me out here. She was. It was just an aberration.
Heather, this is for you. Obviously, the IRS doesn't just, or hasn't just in the past, collected taxes. They were putting their thumb on the scale against conservative organizations. It is an institution that has been weaponized and politicized, and so we can't just pretend like that didn't happen or wave it away.
I just did.
Yeah, I think I don't want to misquote. There was it was either Scott Bessent or they were talking about a death spiral of complexity, something similar to that, and I think what the winning messaging on this, I think you're right, Carl, right? You don't want to demonize someone who's worked for the IRS for 40 years, has done a good job, is trying to be fair. But Tom, you're correct that it has been weaponized. And I think the reason it was able to be weaponized is there is just layer upon layer upon layer. This is an organization those numbers they were tossing out were laughable. And only in DC can you say, oh, it's only 50 million. It's ludicrous. And so I think this is fantastic. I think this is what a lot of Americans voted for, because there's this feeling of helplessness that there's just this giant unaccountable bureaucracy that obviously in one way or another needs to be trimmed.
All right, Carl, I want to switch gears because we got a few minutes left in this segment. I do want to talk about the other goings on in the government. And this is the Trump administration, the way they've been sort of getting after colleges and universities over their funding. And the main one, obviously, is Columbia. The deadline was extended to today. They put forth a list of demands that the university was supposed to meet in order to receive their hundreds of millions of dollars in funding. Penn has gotten a similar notice for their sort of transgender athletes in sports. I think it was 175 million that's at risk there. You've seen other colleges and universities around the country go into hiring freezes and start to roll back some of the DEI stuff that the administration has been targeting and emphasizing. I guess the criticism of this, and it was voiced by the president of Princeton University, actually, my alma mater, Christopher Eisgruber, in a piece for The Atlantic earlier this week, saying, "Look, this is attacking the science and research facilities of these universities, and it's an attack on academic freedom. You can't have the government telling universities how to run their business and getting up in their business if you're doing it with the threat of money. That's extortion, and it's going to, on and on and on." Do you agree with that, or do you think this is an appropriate use of the Trump administration's leverage here?
Well, look, I'm going to be editing stories on this pro and con. I don't want to just sort of lead with my chin here and give my opinion, but I will say this, Tom. The president of your alma mater is he's the most least sympathetic person that the universities could put forward. He put forward in their defense. First of all, Princeton has a multi-billion-dollar endowment. And if the federal government, I'm not sure the federal government should be giving anything to Princeton at all. Fine.
Well, they're actually talking about taxing the endowments now, which would be.
I'm all in favor of that as well. But this guy, Eisengruber, gave a commencement speech. Several friends of mine were there a couple of years ago. And it was a partisan speech, an attack on Donald Trump. He's just not a person you want to be representing your university right now if what your claim is that the Trump administration is being mean to me. Because he's one of these guys, he's a sort of DEI zealot and brags about, how hard it is for white kids to get into Princeton. And I think this is just the beginning. The government is going to go after these people for they're going to demand their university admissions criterion, see if they're even complying with the law. They don't seem to be. They keep getting adverse. They've gotten adverse Supreme Court decisions going back since Bakke. I think that was in the 70s. They've just doubled down and tripled down. They've never acknowledged that they have to do anything differently. I think that you think the IRS, Lois Lerner is a bad leader of the IRS to hold up. Well, so is this guy, Eisgruber.
Heather, what about this? I mean, one of the demands that the Trump administration is making is that the departments of like Middle Eastern studies and whatnot have to get put into receivership, meaning the faculty will no longer have control over those and their hiring and whatnot. And this is one of the things that critics say this is an outrage and this is an impingement on academic freedom. On the other hand, you could argue that given where these things have gone over the last few years, that the faculty and the presidents, they can no longer be trusted to be in charge if the idea is, they're promoting and hiring people who are fostering anti-Semitism on campus and leading to the kind of stuff that we saw, particularly at Columbia University.
I think sort of an interesting side angle on this is, I'm a mom of three. My oldest, we're starting to think about college, right? And the university system is so wacky right now and so out of touch that I honestly sometimes wonder if I should just give him the money instead, and just say, look, just start a business, build a house, just don't go to one of those schools. So
you can send him to Hillsdale.
I could do that. So there's that. And I actually think that we're in the middle of a gigantic shakeup in higher ed. I think, the old credentialist system that has lasted for years is I would suspect it's going to start to fall apart. So I think these universities who have had, sort of free reign for years are going to have to take a hard look at their departments. I also think if you're receiving federal money, you kind of have to play the game. So like Carl said, some of these endowments are over the top ridiculous. I don't have a lot of sympathy for these universities. But I do think that this is symbolic of a shakeup and a restructuring that will probably be happening over the next couple decades.
Yeah, it's definitely a story that we're going to continue to talk about. All right, we're going to leave it there for now. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined by Carl Cannon, our Washington bureau chief, and Heather Wilhelm, who's a columnist for National Review and a former columnist for RCP. Heather, let me start with you on this one. Yesterday was the World Happiness Day, and coincided with the publishing of an annual report about the countries, I guess the happiest countries in the world. I don't know how many people actually have seen this, but I think there's a general knowledge that, the Scandinavian countries are the happiest. And so Yasha Monk, who's a great writer, put on his Substack, sort of went through and tried to suss out exactly, how scientific this report is and how much, and it basically, his conclusion was it's kind of a sham.
Yeah. And it was a great read. I wish I had at the top of the Substack, there's a picture of these people in Helsinki sort of like trundling through this winter hellscape. And he's got a little caption that says like, Helsinki, feel the joy. But it's a great piece. And he sort of systematically goes through and debunks how the methodology is not solid at all. And very subjective. And if you actually look at other measures, the United States rockets up in the happiness level. But when I was reading the article, I was thinking about the movie Snow White, and maybe part of the reason that Americans are so sad is that they're forced to watch this horrible woke remake of.
All right, we're going to come back to that a little bit later. Carl, do you believe that, I've been to Denmark a little bit, spent a little time there. My wife actually worked there for a year and a half, and we had a au pair from Denmark, so we're somewhat familiar with that country in particular. Do you buy this idea that the Scandinavian countries are the happiest in the world consistently, and that the U.S. is plummeting in the rankings because we're so unhappy with, I don't know, all sorts, I guess, our politics or our culture or whatever it is?
Well, it's not even junk science. It's not even as good as junk science, Tom. It's just the study's just a fraud. They ask a question that doesn't have anything to do with happiness. They ask a question that has to do with how you think you're going to do financially in the future. Who cares? These countries, Finland is supposed to be the happiest. I guess they edged out Sweden, which is usually, these are the countries that every year lead the world in suicide. They're not the happiest countries in the world, and they can't be, because the sun only shines half the year there. And I love Scandinavian people, but no, it's just it's laughable is what it is. But it actually was an insight into, everything that comes out of the UN is junk these days. But that the study kind of equates financial well-being with mental well-being, with spiritual well-being, with happiness. It showed you something about the study, the people who put out the quote study, because as everybody knows, the money is not what makes people happy. So,
it's interesting. I actually thought while I was reading it, Carl, that we do these polls for Real Clear Opinion Research every quarter or so, and I was like, what, we should actually craft a survey that we think can get at happiness.
Well, how about this? Ask people how happy they are. The study doesn't even mention the word happiness.
The other thing that reminded me of, there was, and this is maybe last year or so, there was a guy who made these, I think they were TikTok videos, but they were on X or Twitter at the time. And he would go around, I think he was in Florida, and he would wander up to and just strike up conversations with people who were in their 70s and 80s. And he would ask them the meaning of life. What, knowing what you know now, having lived your life, what would you do differently? What's most important to you? And every single one of them said, money's not important. You think it is, that you're going through your whole life, that money's the most important thing. And at the end of your life, you realize it's not important at all. And it's your relationships, it's your family. And they were really poignant videos. But there was this common thread that ran through everything. And Heather, I guess that's when you talk about happiness, to me, that's the big flaw here, is that we do, as Carl mentioned, we so often equate money with happiness. And look, money doesn't hurt. It solves some problems, but it certainly doesn't solve all your problems, and it doesn't actually equal happiness.
And I thought it was interesting too, like going through the study, they're talking about countries ranging from, the US to Bhutan to the Netherlands. And this one, like you said, Carl, this one weird question, ranking yourself on some, status ladder. And all of these countries have wildly different cultures. Some value community more, some value individualism. So yeah, the whole thing was complete bunk. But it was a fun read.
Meanwhile, now you can finance your Chipotle order, Carl. If you're get it via DoorDash, you can pay in payments now. Speaking of money and how important that is, I know how much you like your food.
Tom, you do need enough money to afford, not to belong to an exclusive country club, but to be able to play a greens fees at a nice public course. You do need that. You do need that amount of money to be happy.
Okay, Heather, back to you on this issue of Snow White. So we really haven't talked about this, and I think doesn't the movie come out today? And Disney, this has been in the works for, I think it was filmed in like 2022, and there's been all sorts of controversy surrounding this remake, primarily around Rachel Ziegler, the star, and some of the comments that she's made about how the new version is supposed to be, sort of woke, and they redid it and made it more of a, I don't know, feminist, sort of manifesto or something. Disney scaled down the premieres and only invited influencers who were favorably disposed to, writing positive reviews, it sounds like. And some of the reviews are coming out now and they're not good. I mean, it sounds like this is going to be exactly the disaster that people were predicting it was going to be.
One of my great joys in life is reading really scathing, funny movie reviews. And so this is going to be like Christmas in March for me. Kyle Smith did a great one on the Wall Street Journal that made me laugh out loud. There was one online that said something like, this movie is so bad that even if I was watching it on a plane, I'd walk out. So yeah, I don't know that much about the movie other than it's supposed to be abysmal, but I think the storyline is that the prince is actually some sort of rogue thief who's trying to take down the kingdom, and it's going to be. Let's just wait for the reviews. It's going to is so much fun.
Well, but so are you going to see it?
He's a colonizer.
Well, hold on, Heather. You have 3 boys, as you mentioned. So is this? Are you going to skip past this one at your household?
I think that's a definite no.
Hard pass on Snow White.
Yeah, my oldest son wants to see this movie, Death of a Unicorn. Have you heard of this?
No.
It's like Jurassic Park / they find a deadly unicorn that can cure diseases. So I've got that in my future.
Okay, that sounds fun.
Yeah.
So Carl.
Yeah.
Carl, on the other end of the spectrum, you've got a bunch of grandkids, including some little girls. Will you be taking them to see this movie?
No, and if I tried to initiate a boycott, I would be unsuccessful. I'm just going to have to take a pass, Tom. You can't fight every battle.
Wait, so you're going to let Sharon take the kids to the movie and you're going to sit it out?
No, their parents will probably.
Oh, okay.
You have to tread light. You're not there yet, but you have to tread lightly in that when it comes to that.
People don't know this, but Carl's grandkids call him Dude, like Jeff Bridges from The Big Lebowski, like Dude.
They think it's my name, and I kind of like.
Everybody gets Papa and Nana and Gampy and all this stuff. Carl gets Dude.
You're a cool grandpa.
That's what they think. So let's not let them listen to this show. They'll know otherwise.
All right. Okay. Well, I guess we're going to have to leave it there. Although we will come back. I'm going to watch it, I think, just for the sake of being able to comment on it afterwards. So we may have to have come back and with our reviews. And when that happens, Heather, this is your homework assignment. You have to watch the movie and then you come back on and we can talk more about it. All right?
Yep. Right.
Okay. All right. We're going to take a quick break and we will be back with more Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. Joined now by Mark Penn. He's the CEO of Stagwell and a contributor to Fox News. Mark, thanks for joining me. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Okay, so you wrote a piece that we ran on Real Clear Politics. It was in Fox News, talking about the title that they put on the piece, I assume, is the only thing that will save Democrats in the age of Trump. First of all, you've been in Democratic politics for decades now. So set the baseline here. How bad of a spot are Democrats in?
I've really never seen numbers like we're getting back on the Democratic Party. I think there was like a lot of partisan enthusiasm going into the election, and it held the Democratic Party up, and it maybe only really lost by 2 percentage points or whatever. But I think following the election, people looked at the Democratic Party and they went, well, we had a president who really wasn't up to being president. We have a world that's on fire. I've got the price of eggs and inflation. I've got people who opened the border. I've got gender ideology I don't necessarily agree with. They just looked at the Democratic Party and said, what the heck, right? I think the retrospective consideration of this, and I think all the moderates have now said, this party has got to move to the center. And the left seems to be taking more of a dominant role in the party. And the ratings have just gone woo like that. Like I've never seen anything. It's in my poll in the 30s and some polls in the 20s. Normal Democratic ratings, favorable, unfavorable, is 45, 47, 51.
Right.
I've never seen anything like this.
And so as you've looked at, we're now, I don't know how many months away from the election, a few. And certainly, Trump's been in office now for a couple of months. But have you seen the signs that Democrats are moving to the center? I mean, Chuck Schumer keeping the government open, he faced incredible blowback. I think Van Jones on CNN said he's never seen anything like that either. I mean, there does seem to be, there's all this talk of that Democrats need a Tea Party on the left. Do you see any signs that the moderate wing of the party has any muscles to flex here?
Well, you really can't tell because a lot of it is going to be determined by how well Trump does, what Trump does or does not do. You can't just root for failure of the president of the United States and America, and that's the problem. When the teams think that this is a sport as opposed to having to work together for the good of the people. And I think that right now people see Trump action after action. Now, Trump still is only at 50, 52, high 40s in some of these polls. So the public is still wait and see on Trump. They like a lot of the policies and changes he's making, probably 80% of them, probably 20%. They don't, a little of some of the economics, but the Democrats are just seen as out of their skull. And the fact that really, I think Schumer saved the party from going into like the 15s. I mean, we know that government shutdowns backfire, and had Schumer shut the government down under some technicalities related to a CR that you thought should be somewhat different, oh my God, he was right. And it is wrong that he's under that kind of pressure.
We're speaking with Mark Penn. He's the CEO of Stagwell and head of the Harris poll and a Fox News contributor. Mark, the Democrats seem to have settled on, at least a lot of them, the sort of brightest lights in the party. You look at Chris Murphy on attacking Elon Musk, that this is somehow this oligarchy. This is a way to re-ingratiate themselves with voters, saying they care about the rich. We care about you guys. Jamal Bowman was on CNN last night and called Elon Musk an incompetent thief and a Nazi. They've clearly driven his favorable ratings down. But is that a winning strategy, in your opinion, to focus on Musk and try and make him to be sort of the bogeyman of the Trump era?
I don't get it. I really don't. Trump just said, hey, you got some stranded astronauts? I'll just send a rocket up and pick them up. And he does it. He did it. Okay. Now, the idea that then they should just attack Musk. Musk is reasonably popular. He generally has a neutral to positive rating. He's not the president. He's not government policy. So putting all this firepower on Musk does nothing other than generate a lot of Musk back and forth publicity. He likes to respond. More people go on X. It's really a waste of time. And it's not right. Democrats should be, we were for in the 90s, reinventing government, bringing it down. They should be working with the Musk team. How do we do things right? How do we bring government down right? Instead, they just look like they're for bigger government. I mean, then how do you just oppose this guy and call him just a rich billionaire Nazi when, frankly, he's pretty well liked over there in Israel? And he just has these incredible accomplishments. He didn't just make money finding oil or, being a hedge fund manager. Not that it's a bad profession, but he made money here with some of the greatest inventions of our time, right? The electric car, almost right now self-driving. He's working on, neural links so that people who are disabled will be able to communicate. He's taking us to Mars. This is not just a billionaire. He is a genuine inventor and innovator.
Well, you kind of touched on this a little bit, Mark, but I mean, again, if you were advising the leaders of the Democratic Party, and I suspect you're probably still in contact with a lot of Democrats privately, what's your advice to them, and what should they be doing? How should they move forward here?
Well, you make up a list of things that you really want, and then you make up a list of things that you really are willing to cooperate with. Are you willing to cooperate with closing the border, or was it all a ruse anyway, and you really were for an open border? Right? Are you willing to cooperate in reducing the size of government and the deficit? Do you have things that you want in terms of climate change, inflation, helping working people, right? That you can put forth to do a compromise, right? I mean, when we balanced the budget, it was balancing the budget according to our values. I don't see that kind of operation. I don't see the left supporting that operation. They want to try to do what they did in 2016, which was to rip it all down. And that's not working. Trump got a lot smarter than he was in 2016.
You end the piece, Mark, by saying, the party's going to have to wait for the next Bill Clinton to come along. And it made me think, as you look out across the landscape, and certainly in the short term, who's going to run for president in 2028 on the Democratic side, but even a little bit longer term than that, who is the next Bill Clinton? I mean, is there anyone you could identify and say, this is a person who actually might be in Bill Clinton's mold that could lead the party out of the wilderness?
Well, first of all, let me just say about presidential politics in general, you generally don't see what's coming that well. Nobody saw Donald Trump coming. Nobody saw Barack Obama coming.
Right.
Nobody saw Bill Clinton coming when he was Bill Clinton. So
good point.
We take a look and they say, look, Josh Shapiro should have been the vice presidential candidate, really consistently has an opportunity to bring the moderate wing back to the party if he really wants to try that and believes he can win a primary. And look, if Trump ends badly, then I think the left is going to say, see, we told you. And if Trump does a pretty good job, the party is going to have no chance whatsoever if it doesn't figure out how to move to the center and get a Bill Clinton in. And even then, it'll be a pretty tough race for this party to come back then rather than in another time. All parties eventually come back. All parties eventually get smart. Even the Labour Party in Britain came back.
All right. We will leave it there. Mark Penn, CEO of Stagwell. Mark, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. Stick around.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and for our next segment, we've invited Charlie Stone, a contributor at RCP, to share his latest interview that he conducted for the RCP website. Charlie's guest is best-selling author and attorney Scott Turow, whose books have sold more than 30 million copies worldwide. So here's Charlie Stone in conversation with Scott Turow.
Scott, thank you so much for joining us. You are an author, an attorney, 15 books, 30 languages, 30 million copies. My goodness, what a life.
It's been a blessed journey.
Well, good. We're going to talk about that. But speaking of 30 years ago, I don't know if you know this, but we actually shared a vestibule on a Metra train car. I was a young lawyer. I had read your book 1L, which sort of gave me confidence that maybe I could actually do this. And I had a great conversation with you in that vestibule. And then you exited the train. The problem was I was so tongue-tied, that conversation was entirely in my head. We didn't have a conversation.
Okay.
So I'm happy 30 years later, here we are. We can finally have that conversation. I'm sure you've been waiting with bated breath.
I have been, and I'm sure that you have in mind all the questions that you wanted to ask 30 years ago.
Let's get into your career. What's fascinating, it spans so many interesting aspects. And Terry Hake actually spoke to my law school, and obviously you were involved in Operation Greylord. I'm curious if we can explore that a little bit from the context of, can you give a little background of what that was? Because a lot of people don't know what that was. Your role and then how it shaped how you looked at justice moving forward.
Well, my view of justice in Cook County was shaped actually by my grandfather, whom I was very close to, and he told me a story about getting swindled by a relative. And I said to him, Grandpa, why didn't you sue? And his response to me was, me, poor man like me, said, I can't afford to buy a judge. And that was my grandfather's view of justice in the state courts in Cook County. And to their everlasting, enormous credit, the late Tom Sullivan, U.S. Attorney in Chicago, Dan Reedy, the chief of the Special Prosecutions Division, because of a happenstance, a cooperating witness had appeared, they decided that they were going to launch an investigation of the Cook County judiciary, particularly the criminal courts. And ultimately, they concluded that the only way to do it effectively would be to have undercover agents working for the FBI and the Attorney's Office. Terry Hake, whom you mentioned, was actually an FBI agent, but he was also a law school graduate. And so he posed first as a corrupt state's attorney, prosecutor, and then having proved his mettle to the corrupt bar, he then became a corrupt defense lawyer, paying judges to throw cases. I ended up with prosecutions against 2 judges, and at the meantime, Greylord went on and was ultimately exposed when somebody in the Department of Justice got loose-lipped with a reporter. But the secret had held in Chicago, which was really remarkable, because in order to send a corrupt, quote-unquote, corrupt state's attorney into the courts, we had to have the knowing cooperation of the state's attorney at that time, who was at that point Richard J. Daley, later the mayor of Chicago. And Rich kept that secret, never let anybody know that Greylord was happening, just as was true of the FBI agents.
Well, as a younger lawyer, that must have shaped your sense of both the coercive power of corruption and just everybody getting along with the corruption. Has that shaped what you wrote about, like with Rusty Savage and all of your Presumed Innocence, Presumed Guilty, all of these wonderful books that you created? How did that directly impact how you wrote those books?
Well, there's a line in Presumed Guilty, which I borrowed from myself, which is to say that being a prosecutor, you develop a proctologist's view of humanity.
Give me your sense of that. Obviously, a lot of discussion in the news today about U.S. attorneys being dismissed, the concept of weaponizing the U.S. Attorney's Office. It certainly rubs me, just the mere concept of it, the wrong way. How are you sort of thinking about that, and how are you talking about it? How can we ensure that does not?
Well, I'm a product of a Justice Department that was resolute apolitical. I do not remember in my 8 years as an AUSA ever talking politics with an FBI agent, Secret Service agent. It didn't matter to the way they did their jobs. There have been some mess-ups by the FBI, but I still have tremendous faith in the institution and certainly in the Justice Department. And as far as I could tell, they followed the evidence where it led. And of course, it led to some pretty high places. Now, having said that, the fear, of course, is that those who think the department was weaponized will weaponize it as a form of revenge. And we'll see what happens. I think from what little I understand, Pam Bondi's a pretty good lawyer, and I'm not confident that she will tolerate seeing that department turned into an instrument of political vengeance. I certainly hope not. Her deputy, one of Donald Trump's defense lawyers, Todd Blanche, also has the reputation of being a real lawyer, not a political person. So I hope it doesn't happen. I see some forces of resistance within the department, but I could be completely wrong.
Do you sometimes get frustrated that you read the headlines and they're so bizarre and so head scratching that you're like, I wish I wrote that. I wish that was fiction.
Well, fortunately, we can always steal from life, Charlie. You know, people forget fast. So look, there's been a lot of stuff, especially in this decade, that nobody would believe. And, you know, and I think many of us in this country, whichever side that you're on, you have a sense that stuff is happening that they just can't believe. That it's like, you know, if I get different political views than I do, I would look at the Joe Biden participated in that debate and say, how in the hell did anybody allow this man to have control over the levers of power? It's clearly no longer up to it. So there's been a lot on both sides that just seems beyond belief.
You've had a very storied career outside of the practice of law, award-winning novelist, and now you have your most recent book, Presumed Guilty, which is another bestseller. Must just get tired all the time having these bestsellers, right?
Yeah, it's a terrible experience.
So hard.
Because it's so awful, I would recommend it to
anybody, right?
It's a lot of fun.
But I'm curious because I'd love to know, I think it's a true story. I don't know, but when you were a lawyer and then you wrote Presumed Innocent and then it became a hit and your father was still like, well, you still have time for medical school? Like, is that a true story?
Well, it's through the repetitions, it's been slightly distorted, but I never knew if my father read anything that I wrote leading up to Presumed Innocent. But I made it a point of giving him a copy of the novel. And I heard nothing from him for about 6 weeks. And finally, I said, Dad, did you read the book? And he says, yeah, I read the book. He said, well, what do you think? He says, I still think you could have gone to medical school. And it's like, okay.
Yeah, thanks, Pop.
When he began to get a sense of the dimension of this thing, he was very happy about it. And in fairness to my dad, I remember before the movie Presumed Innocent premiered, there was a screening at the White House. And, you know, I and my ex-wife were invited to come to the White House for dinner. And as it happened frequently, guess what day my father had open heart surgery? But my dad, to his credit, said, look, I want you to get on that plane and go to D.C. And of course, despite the troubled nature of my relationship with my father, I didn't feel like I could do that until I knew he was out of the woods. But once he was out of the woods, it was the only time in my life I ever chartered a private jet, you know, where we went to D.C. in time for dinner at the White House.
Well, we really appreciate your time today. Thank you. Is there anything else you would like to add?
No, but it's been a great conversation, Charlie. Thank you.
You've been listening to RCP contributor Charlie Stone in conversation with author and attorney Scott Turow. You can hear and see more of Charlie's interview series on RealClearPolitics.com. It's good stuff and worth checking out. And that will do it for today's program. I'm Andrew Walworth, and on behalf of Carl, Tom, Charlie, all of us at RCP, thank you for listening, and we'll be back here on Monday. Have a great weekend.